22nd, 2023 special call city council meeting for the purposes of hearing from the Lynchburg registrar and to hold a closed meeting to receive legal advice and information concerning employment matters connected to a city department, and to discuss the investment of public funds to assist in securing the expansion of a prospective business where bargaining is involved, where if made public initially, the financial interest of the city would be adversely affected. Pursuant to sections 2.2-3711A5 and 2.2-3711A6 of the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended. We'll move on to agenda item number 1 to hear from the City of Lynchburg's General Registrar. Before we call him up, though, I want to kind of give a brief introduction for the purpose of the night, although he is our guest of honor. So last week, I had a nice conversation with Mr. Pence after our last special called meeting. And we'll just call August this month, the special month. So we had a great conversation. He expressed in our conversation about the needs of the registrar's office and some emergency needs that were stated. So I asked him to give me a few days to maybe have some conversations with the city staff to see if we could work out an arrangement with it that would help meet those needs. So we've done that. We worked with city staff, had some really good conversations, had a great meeting yesterday, the vice mayor and I, with Mr. Pence and some other staff members. And we were able to come up with I think, a solution to the needs of the registrar's office. So we'll be discussing that tonight. I do want to say a couple things. We are not here to talk about any personnel issues within the city. Those are not matters we can discuss openly for legal reasons. We're also hopefully not here to have grievances or attack anybody necessarily on the city staff. I think hopefully we can just have a discussion about the problem and the need and the solution that is in front of us all to hopefully get a solution passed tonight that Mr. Pence is happy with. So we did get a resolution prepared that was shared earlier on our city website, and the resolution will address kind of the needs that we've discussed with the city staff as far as what might meet the needs, again, of the registrar for this evening. So, Mr. Pence, would you like to come forward?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Council, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight, and I want to thank those who requested a special meeting to address the issue my office is facing. As you are aware, I have been allocated 2 deputy registrars by the Electoral Board, and this was at the time that I took office. I've had difficulties in actually getting these officers hired into city employment due to how the city handles the filling of vacancies. Yes.
I don't think you can just that microphone.
Sure. The Electoral Board granted me the authority to add a 3rd deputy registrar, mainly for the purpose of solving some of those hiring challenges. Over the past month, as I've had appointment decisions pending, I've worked with city staff to get to the point where there was agreement to hire my appointees. Their advice to me was that probably the city council would need to be involved in resolving the matter. After some action, the city staff, I agreed I could fill 1 vacancy, and a hiring action on that role is in process. The second appointment I have made remains to be resolved, and this is what brings me to your meeting tonight. I see on the agenda a resolution that's a result of some top-level negotiations with the mayor, vice mayor, and city staff. I appreciate the effort that's gone into getting that resolution together. And while it does not solve every problem, I think it's the best way forward at this point in time. I urge the City Council to adopt it and the city staff to assist me in executing it. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we adopt the resolution.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Pence. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, this will get us in shape for the upcoming election. We, I believe we're running behind a little bit because the stalls, but this would help Mr. Pence get people in place to help him get a fair election in Lynchburg.
Okay, great. Anybody else want any discussion? Councilman Huggison?
Thank you. Mr. Pence, could you come back up? I got a question. Maybe you can, part of this, we're talking about problems and solutions. We have before us, which I'm glad that we had met with you more than just yesterday, but talked with you for the last several months, seeing problems that are happening and problems that are brewing to make sure that we have fair elections, make sure there's people in place that can actually carry out. Now, can you tell us just a little bit of difference between a part-time employee versus a deputy?
So there's two aspects to being a deputy registrar. First is that because my office is a state office, there's an appointment made for someone to become a deputy registrar. They are sworn in as an official. The city then hires that person as a city employee, just as I'm hired as a city employee, and then we proceed from there. The registrar has a term of office, as you know. My term expires June 30, 2027, and any deputy registrars that I will appoint, they will also have a term of office that expires on June 30, 2027. The reason for that is because the statute requires that a deputy registrar have a term that does not exceed the term of the other registrar, general registrar. And so, one, I would say, if you want to ask about one of the challenges that we face, because there's a dual role, if you will, of a deputy registrar as a city employee and a state appointee, those are two, similar and parallel, but in my view, slightly different things.
And so the previous deputy registrars had that same kind of term like you just described
Yes,
for
correct.
you, but obviously only a few months ago.
Yes, that's correct. So their term expired on June 30, 2023.
2023 is when it expired. And since that point, and so now a deputy registrar has maybe slightly more power than
They're sworn,
guess-
they're a sworn officer, so there are certain roles and, responsibilities that you could entrust to a sworn officer that you wouldn't entrust to a temporary employee or someone who wasn't a staff person that was on staff with the city.
like handling ballots and
Things
lots
like-
of things
exactly.
that we.
All those kind of tasks where you would want someone who is a sworn officer to do those things.
And so we can have the fair and open elections.
Yes,
So now your term began July 1st,
2023.
2023, and it goes to June 30th of 2027.
Yep.
And you mentioned that the deputy registrars have the same term of office.
I mean, they will by default, but of course, the way the law reads is the electoral board actually gets to set their term. So it's my responsibility as a registrar to appoint the deputies, and it's their responsibility as electoral board to determine how long those appointments last, with the caveat or with the boundary that they can't exceed the term of the general registrar.
And I remember from hearing from citizens coming up and saying opposite things that said, hey, the registrar isn't appointed by the electoral board, but they're actually can hold over something.
I mean, the registrar is appointed by the electoral board, so they get to make that decision every 4 years as to who they're going to appoint for a new term. They could appoint an incumbent if they so choose, or they can appoint someone else. There's an Attorney General opinion about that, and basically says they may do that, with the exception, of course, they're not allowed to do that for political purposes
Yeah.
or other illegal purposes.
And so with this now, you have 2 deputy registrars, of which maybe not necessarily working to help making sure elections are fair. Adding a 3rd deputy registrar will help to make sure at least there's one person in addition to you, and then the temporary people that are in the office.
Right, so the goal right now is to allow me to have 2 in-office, full-time, functional deputy registrars. And while we'll still need some additional temporary help as we go through early voting season, we have all the days of early voting, starting on September 22nd, down through the election. So I will have my office open for people to come do early voting, and I need to staff that And that will be more than I could do with simply 2 deputy registrars, so.
And so
we'll have
early
to have
voting begins September 22nd, you said? So that's 1 month from today.
That's correct.
So I am very glad that we called a special meeting. I know we tried to discuss it last week, and thank you for being here. Unfortunate that we weren't able to, but at least we are able to now to discuss it and then look at some of the resolution, absent some of the flowery language that's in this resolution. I think the meat of the resolution is what the important part is, not the, kind of all this whereas is at the beginning. So the important part is the therefore resolved. Now, those are going to be helpful for you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Missions?
So let me ask you something going back to that early voting. That starts September 22nd for the November election, correct?
That's correct, yes.
We've got a primary coming up next year,
We
presidential
do.
primary.
Yep,
Is there early voting associated with
yep.
that?
There's early voting associated with all the elections.
And when will the early voting for that presidential primary begin?
I have to look at the calendar, but I believe it's late January.
Late January?
Yep.
And this is the first time, I think, that we've had the 45 days of early voting for presidential primary?
We've had it in previous years, but it's a recent addition to the code.
But as far as a presidential primary goes, I think this is the first year where we've had that.
That could be correct, yes.
Okay. All right, and then I think I'm going to go ahead and offer a substitute motion where we strike these first 3 whereas clauses because, one, I was not at that meeting, so I don't want to support something that talks about a meeting that I wasn't at. Who was at that meeting, by the way?
It was the mayor, it was the vice mayor, it was the city manager, deputy city manager, my attorney, and who else do we have? Oh, yeah, and of course, Mr. Friedman, yes.
And you say like, your personal attorney that
Yes.
you're paying for yourself?
Yes, that's correct.
That sounds like hard negotiations, not an amicable meeting. So, yeah, that was actually left out here because it says mayor, vice mayor, and other city officials. Doesn't mention anything about Mr. Pence's personal attorney that was there. So, yeah, I'd like to make a substitute motion that we strike those first 3 whereas clauses on this resolution, and that also to strike the last sentence of the first paragraph, because I wouldn't want to necessarily see us have to figure out how to return that position if it's determined having a general election, right, with 45 days of early voting leading into November. You're closing off that election, right? You're cleaning up the rolls January 1st, and then you're launching another, and I think that, major primary with the presidential cycle. And with that being the first time we've had 45 days of early voting in a presidential cycle, I have concerns about saying we're going to relinquish that position right away, going into that 45 days of early voting with the presidential primary. And I'm sure everybody here would agree with, we need to make sure that we have the proper staffing to ensure that we're able to hold accessible, accurate, fair, and transparent elections. And I can't think of a better way to do that with all of this increase in early voting than to actually keep that 3rd deputy registrar position intact for you for the rest of the fiscal year. So that's the motion. The substitute motion is to strike the first 3 whereas clauses and then remove the last sentence from the first paragraph, because I just don't think it's a good idea to have you being concerned about how you're going to have to reconcile and give that position back when you're closing out the November general election and then getting ready to get started on a big presidential primary push.
As I kind of alluded to earlier, some of the language in the resolution, I've never seen a resolution that kind of talks about people at a meeting and kind of phrases it in an amicable means and who was there, and it's very different. I've never seen one in my 20 years where you're saying, it's almost like making a budget resolution, saying, well, I met with Councilmember Taylor, and I met with such and such, and I talked to these people, and therefore, and especially when it's something that there's 2 council members present, 5 that weren't. And now you're saying that, hey, we agree that this was maybe an amicable meeting, when, I recognize, and we're all adults here, so we can recognize that this hasn't been amicable. I don't think this has been a fantastic procedure over the last 3-4 months. There's been anything but amicable, and I'm glad that we can come to a resolution to help fund. But I don't like to put lipstick on a pig either. And I'm not going to say that, hey, something was pure joyous when there's been problems. I mean, I knew there were problems. I've heard from the electoral board. I've seen those meetings. We had to get actually security at electoral board meetings. I've been here for 20 years. I've never witnessed the fact, it's like having security at the Historical Preservation Commission. You don't do that. You don't need that, or the Martin Luther King Foundation. There's usually not tense moments. There's usually not where people are very concerned about safety, that meetings are canceled mid-sentence because of fear. There was not like usually having to get sworn police officers there that are being paid for to be there. So we all recognize that there's been some problems. And now part of the discussion, part of the resolution is glad that we can move forward. The thing is, though, we also don't want to do this again. We want to make sure that our elections are good and fair. I'm glad we're having this meeting today. I'm glad we have, some solutions. I talked to Greg several weeks ago when we first had problems with this, and knew that, and Winter was out of town, and thought, hey, we need to do something. We need to kind of address this, because these elections are coming up quickly, and we need to make sure there's something. So having, again, I've never seen flowery language in a resolution, almost trying to say, hey, because without this wonderful thing, things wouldn't have happened the way it is. And so I'm glad that we have met. I'm glad I've talked with the electoral board over the last several months and seen the problems that have happened. I want to make sure these problems don't continue. So making sure they don't continue first understands that, hey, there were problems. Let's not do it again. That's the best thing. It's not to say there are problems, oh, they're gone because, there was a meeting apparently yesterday. Okay, that's kind of the last minute. I think that was the 21st, which was yesterday. So I'm in favor of striking some of those whereases to get back to a normal resolution that we would have, rather than saying, hey, here's who. I don't know if it's, to me, it almost smells of posturing or something. I don't know. I can't judge motive, but as I read it, I've never seen that. As Councilmember Mischin said about the end of 2024, since we're starting so late, that would mean we're now August. Does this require 2 readings, by the way? It does require 2 readings. So this can't even happen tomorrow.
Transition the position
Okay.
tomorrow. We just can't transfer the money
Okay.
until a second.
Perfect. So at least we can move forward beginning tomorrow. Hallelujah. It requires 2 readings. So our next reading is our next meeting, unless we're going to have our 4th special meeting. And, normally we have 1 meeting in August. We're meeting every week, so it's going to be kind of fun. I don't know what I'm going to do next Tuesday if we can't meet again. But anyway, I'm glad that it doesn't have to be, the second reading doesn't have to be another special meeting. But with that, making sure that the resources are there, because that presidential primary is going to be different. I think that is the first time that we've had that long of a window. I think the presidential primary has been very short. A lot of times I think people are getting used to voting early. And I think, has the numbers been up for early voting? I don't know if I know you just got there recently,
They climb
but,
every year, right? They climb every year.
and I know the governor has been pushing for more people to early vote. And so other people, it isn't just one party that's, doing early voting. So I imagine there's going to be more. And a presidential primary that has, I don't know how many candidates in it now or how many will be on the ballot by that time, but I've seen 16 or a lot of people, which means there may be a lot of people coming out to early voting. And so hopefully we can reassess that January 24th. We'll pull that out and then reassess it as we get closer to see what times happen and to see if you are up to full staff. Because right now, we're going to probably have just one deputy registrar, right? You're having one beginning hopefully tomorrow and then adding another fairly soon?
Well, I have approval to do one as of September 5th, and
So
this would
that's-
be the second, which would bring me into what would normally be my full staffing.
Okay. So, and I hope we can do that with we can always come back and amend that, correct? So if we strike out the end of January 2024 in the middle of a presidential primary, we can hear then again back from Mr. Pence and recognize that, yep, we're doing fine without it, or we need it because things are different. So, thank you.
Any other discussion before we vote on the substitute motion? No? Okay, let's vote, please. Okay, any other discussion on the original motion to pass the resolution as it's presented? Council Missions?
Just kind of surprised to see people that don't want to actually put additional staffing and manpower in your office to make sure that we can have fair and free and transparent elections. Would it have been extremely helpful for you to have that third position potentially in January?
I certainly wouldn't turn it down, right?
Yeah, so I'm just very disappointed that substitute motion failed, and I will always stand behind making sure that we have the adequate resources available to ensure that we have fair, accurate, accessible, and transparent elections.
Motion because our registrar stood here and said he was perfectly okay with the resolution the way it was. And I didn't like the idea of not having an end time to that FTE.
Are you comfortable with the staff that you're going to have?
I'm comfortable with 2 deputy registrars at this point in time. I would say that if I feel like there is a difficulty coming up after this election, and I anticipate that the January primary or, following elections would be, needing additional staff, I would certainly come back and ask for, the council to reconsider that.
Yes.
That's like the encourage you to make sure you communicate with the staff. Like the city manager, I would go to them first and to express your needs. I think it makes it so much easier and so much more fluent when you go through the proper channels and ask for requests. Thank you, appreciate it.
The deputy city manager did reach out to me. We did have communication.
And just for the record, we had the discussion yesterday and again today that you were comfortable with what was on the resolution and had stated yesterday that you didn't need a third full-time employee at this point. So that was why the resolution was made the way it was. And I wanted to make sure when we talked again today that you had read the resolution, you were comfortable with that. So I wouldn't have put that before you tonight if we had not had that conversation. And I know you talked to the vice mayor as well. So with that, let's go ahead and vote, please.
Can we divide the question? I mean, I'm very uncomfortable with that.
No.
I'm very uncomfortable with this first
He's
whereas.
seen it, we've already discussed it. Go ahead and vote again, please. There we go. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Pence, we appreciate it. Okay, we'll now move on to closed session agenda item number 2, consideration of a closed meeting to receive legal advice and information concerning employment matters connected to a city department pursuant to the authority of section 2.2-3711A4 through A7 and A8 of the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended, and to discuss the investment of public funds to assist in securing the expansion of a prospective business where bargaining is involved, where if made public initially, the financial interest of the city would be adversely affected pursuant to sections 2.2-3711A5 and 2.2-3711A6 of the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended. May I have a motion to go into closed? Okay, any further discussion? All right, go ahead and vote. All right, we're now in closed session.